And testing one, two, three. Hello, everyone. I see horses here as always. Good afternoon, all. May the Lord bless and protect. Same to you too. So, hello, everyone. I'm here with the Thunderous One, uh, who's, as everyone knows, a great favorite here on the channel. And thank you, Thunderous. How are you today?
Fine, thank you very much, Lloyd. Good to be with you and spend the closing hours of the week in your company and discussing some of our favourite subjects. Certainly
Yeah,
with the news that's been happening over the week.
yeah. Thunderous, when I met you, you spoke about atheism in a way that I'd heard nobody speak. You had a knowledge of the topic that I learned a great deal from. I mean, you taught me much about atheism. I also learned from Thaddeus. And from the two of you, I think is where I gained the most of my knowledge. But you have a particular perspective, and yeah, we were just chatting before this on my talk on that I did this week called "Atheist Materialism is Scientific Paganism." Are you familiar with that concept?
No, it's not something I'm particularly familiar with. Certainly I recall our discussions from years ago about atheism, and I think thank you for your kind comments. I'm sure Mr. T would say the same, but you've taken it to another level, a level that's I hadn't considered before. So
Well, I
thank you for your
mean,
kind words, but you've gone on another level beyond where I was with it.
true, but still, you were able to speak to the common man in a way that it's just natural and easygoing. And hello, horse, and hello, dragon. Good to see you both. Um,
Yeah, I think with myself, what it was, when you consider the way that the world is today and everything that's happening in it, there has to be sort of like a foundation for it to move forward. If you look at if you consider the letter abbreviation salad, that has stifled a lot of people's movements as far as their thinking is concerned, their freedoms
mhm.
of speech, their opinions and whatnot. Um, there has to be sort of like a foundation for that to be legitimate. So when you look at atheism, however people want to describe atheism, um, in my opinion, in my estimation, when you speak to an atheist and you ask them about the origins of man, the origins of the universe, the periodic table as such, their default will be Darwinian evolution. So for me, they are not atheists, they're Darwinian evolutionists. So when you start,
That's yeah.
sorry, go on.
Go no, go on, please. Yeah.
So when your premise is Darwinian evolution, what you've basically done is you've removed all objective morality from the equation. You've reduced human beings to be nothing more than a mass of atoms and cells. You're nothing more than the combination of the periodic table. Within Darwinian evolution, stroke atheism, or what I call Darwino-atheism, you have no free will. You cannot even account for consciousness because those things are not material. If those things are not material, then logic dictates that everything is subjective then in how you view the world. This is a reality for some atheist promoters. For instance, Richard Dawkins, I put two videos on my channel previous, or on my current channel actually on there now,
Hmm.
where he actually says there's no such thing as free will, and your purpose of life is what you subjectively make it.
So
Okay.
that's the same thing that Sam Harris says, and many other atheists like Daniel Dennett and others. Free will is an illusion, but not only that, they go beyond that. Hello, Lilo Main, Just Janice, and Tom Yokai, Spiritual Warfare. Welcome. They go beyond the idea of free will being an illusion. They actually
But
state that personality, character, the self is not only an illusion but a delusion. It is matter having a delusion because it's a metaphysical concept. It's not just matter extending into space, which is what materialists believe. And what are your thoughts on that?
well, it won't make any sense because if your premise is a lie, all you can ever do is lie, and sound clever with your lies in order for it to make sense. I mean, for how on earth would the periodic table know that it needed to create the illusion in order for the mass of cells that is now existing that needs an illusion in order to live its life? No other creature has that. They go by instinct, but the human being doesn't. You see, the thing is with law, or free will. This is where the paradox comes in. Without law, you have no free will, or without free will, you have no law. The law, or in a sense, godly law, is the very definition and, if you like, point where you can demonstrate your free will. You either choose to obey or you choose to disobey. That's the point. That's the point of free will. We choose to obey God or we choose to disobey God. Without
Interestingly,
that law there is no free will. The free will is the law is a demonstration of our free will and our obedience. It's really quite simple. But so by removing free will, what they're suggesting is that you don't have free will, you don't have character, you don't have make moral choices. Everything that you're saying and doing in your life is nothing more than the process of chemical reactions within your brain. How on earth does that make sense?
right? Yeah, I'm sharing my screen to you, Thunderous. You know, you make a very good point. How does the periodic table know to create personalities, to create selves, to create personalities and character traits so that we can survive? Which is really interesting. This is something that I covered with the audience a couple of days ago. This is Gorgias, who was a nihilist. Right? Atheism often leads to nihilism, and he writes, this is one of the philosophers that underpins the idea of atheism. So nothing exists, and even if something exists, nothing can be known about it. And even if something can be known about it, knowledge about it cannot be communicated to others. This is the view of Gorgias. Now, when you get to the rationalists, when you get to the nominalists, they have exactly the same philosophy. They're repeating the same statements. They might use it, they might word it slightly differently. It might sound more scientific or more, whatever. They might write it in a way that sounds a little better, but really it's the same ideas. And then I've traced basically a combination of the exact same ideas of these pagan philosophers from 2,600 years ago and the statements that atheists make. So, but they lead to incoherence. They lead to relativism, and we know that this means that you deny studying the world. You reject taking empirical data from the world. I mean, what are your thoughts on this opening statement that makes that nothing exists?
Well, the first thing that I thought about there was Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 to 5, and I think it's Matthew 10, where Jesus says, "Keep on seeking, keep on knocking, keep on asking." The Proverbs scripture talks about seek for it as for hidden treasure, about the very knowledge of God. So they're contradicting. God says there are things to know, there are things you can know. They're saying no, it's all relative. There are things that you can't know. So for me personally, I find that when you're looking at philosophy as an example can tell you how beautiful a flower is, how beautiful a flower is, but philosophy can't tell you where the beautiful flower came from.
That's interesting. If you consider, whereas here you've amazing how well you know the Bible. Proverbs 2, 1 to 5, turn your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. If you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Which is really interesting. And this guy's saying you can't know anything.
Yes.
And nothing exists, nothing is real. And of course, this is also very, what's the word? It's narcissistic in that part of the reasoning, the foundation for their beliefs is that they believe there's nothing external to you. You are the measure of all things. Your subjective senses, and only the five senses like taste, touch, smell, hearing, and so on, only those are valid sources of information. So metaphysics, all of these things are invalid. There's nothing outside, only your opinion. And what if you've got a very flawed, faulty, subjective opinion? Then what about the guy next to you has a completely different one? And this leads to chaos.
But this is the point. I mean, one of the old arguments is if you take your subject, if you have a society that's created its own subjective moral laws, well, they're not moral because there's no such thing as morality in the universe. It's just a case of human beings deluding themselves into decisions, and some deluded human beings that have a bigger personality and presence over the weaker ones and imposing their subjective views on other human beings. Then so that becomes a mass of human beings with a subjective point of view predicated on the view of other human beings that have a bigger personalities, maybe a bigger influence, and can bully them into the way that they view things, going to another land where the same thing is happening, but their views are totally different. So who's right and who's wrong then? But then I suppose in the materialistic worldview, how do you know what is right or wrong? There is no right or wrong. There simply is. How does that make any sense?
Fair point. Beats me. So Pakistani Kafir, very welcome. Ernesto, welcome. XYZ, good to see you. Always good to see you. Thank you. Of course, Dragon. Lilo Main, New Glove, welcome. And yeah, Hawthorne, you only missed a couple of seconds, so you were good. Yeah, there was something you mentioned that I just lost my thread. There's something you said that I was going to talk about on this. But atheists claim to be scientific, to use the scientific method. Yet, if man is the measure of all things, if your subjective senses are the measure of all things, how is that scientific? That's entirely subjective, and because it will differ from the person next to you, it is entirely relativist. There is
Well,
no foundational truth then. There's no objectivity.
but but when to make it science, that's where the Darwinian evolution comes in. That's the scientific predicate for atheism. If you want to use the word science, science is you could say is the study of the natural universe that we live in.
So
So,
you're
but
saying that this incoherence, this lack of objectivity, is scientific then?
I'm saying they call it that.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what they say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're saying, but they have to have a scientific predicate, and then that predicate is Darwinian evolution. So when they're saying we have to think in a scientific way, we have to have a scientific premise. Atheism isn't scientific, but they claim that Darwinian evolution is scientific. So Darwinian evolution is the start of their scientific basis for atheism.
Let me just find something on materialism. I wanted to.
Or,
Uh,
or materialism. Materialism and Darwinian evolution is one and the same thing. It's just that with the materialistic point of view, is that it's undirected. It's all about happenstance and chance. I mean, let's have it right. When you really look at it, when you look at the atheist point of view, you have, as some people have put it, I don't have the faith to become an atheist or a Darwinian evolutionist. But
yeah.
that's not what they really believe. They mock people. Let's say intelligent and as a minimal commitment to theism. That is to say, let's not argue about the many gods that people claim are the true God. Let's just look at the minimal commitment. There is a God. Their argument is that we need a sky daddy. We believe in fairy stories and all the pejoratives that they've come up with against the people who accept intelligent design. But the fact of the matter is, they don't follow science. They follow scientists. That's what their belief system is based on. These New Age druids, the Sam Harris, the Richard Dawkins, the Lawrence Krauss, and the Neil deGrasse Tysons, and all the other such ones. That's where their faith is what these men say. The science is exactly the same for those who
Actually,
accept intelligence.
they define science as materialism. They've conflated science with. And let me just pause 1 second. Welcome, everyone. Thanks all for being here on this Sunday. For me, it's Sunday evening. For Thunderous, it's Sunday evening. For some of you, it's Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon. But welcome and thank you. Just by the way, this month I had more than double the views on my channel. My views rose by 116%, which is really fantastic. Also, I did put out a great deal more content, but my views went up by more than double, but not many of those people subscribe. So there are more people that are watching. I think roughly half of the viewers actually are not subscribers. I would really love if those who are viewers would also be subscribers. So take a moment, please, to subscribe and hit the bell for those notifications. It really does help my channel grow. So my channel is growing, but if all of those who are viewers would become subscribers, I would have a significantly larger channel. So I'd appreciate that. So, and thanks all. Good to see you. And you've been sharing. Yes, man, thank you. Yeah. Also, I've been putting out a lot more content, and I'm planning lots of work also on philosophy, just thinking, what is good thinking? What is part of our heritage? If we look back at our ancient heritage that we've inherited in terms of reason and logic. And so at the moment, I want to sort of go back into atheism and also looking through what is called the synthesis of all heresies, this modernism. And I want to examine over the next couple of months the different heresies, the different incoherent ideologies that make up this new modernist synthesis, and all of it is traceable to pagan ideologies, pagan ideas, pagan philosophies that are clearly, I mean, they're pagan, therefore they're primitive, and none of this stuff is actually scientific. So atheists are dressing up old ideas from 2,000-3,000 years ago purely for the denial of God. And it's not just the denial of God, it's not just the denial of God's moral law, but it is also from a denial of the logos, of logic. So there's something else there. They reject the way of thinking that Christians should have, which is to use reason. And we obviously have to balance reason and faith. We have to find a synthesis of the two so that our faith is grounded in reason and reality, but that our reason is not dry and sterile, but also supported by faith. It's like, as I mentioned once before, imagine you have a boat and you're on the ocean, right? You have either sails or a rudder. If you only have sails, you can go really fast, but you can't change your direction. You can't choose where you go. So you've got one aspect, but not another. And a rudder, if you have only a rudder, you can move the rudder, but you need some wind. You can you can change direction, but you can't go anywhere. So you need to have a balance of both,
Can
right?
I
So these two, yes, Thunderous?
can with what you forgive me if I interrupted you there,
Sure,
but
sure. Yep.
there's a scripture I would like you to pull up in context with what you're saying now, because there's another element. I don't know if you've considered this. It's Romans 1:20.
So here we are.
So it reads there, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse.
Excuse.
What do you
Yes.
think that scripture is actually saying, Lloyd? I'm not trying to question you
No,
here.
no, 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 no. It's a really good point. No, that's why I talk to you, because you have a perspective that is, I mean, you have a really unique perspective. You ask really good questions. I've noticed that about you. But this is saying that remember, if you go back to the Middle Ages, you have the scholastics. They spoke of, there are two ways of knowing God. There's faith and there's the book of nature, right? Nature speaks of God. Nature tells you that we were created, that there is design, that we have a creator that made these things. There's order, there is logic, there is reason, there is coherence, there is consistency. So this tells us that nature speaks of a creator.
Absolutely. So it says that for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities. So the invisible qualities will clearly be love, wisdom, power, so on and so forth. His eternal divine nature have clearly been seen, being understood. So that's looking at the information, as you've correctly said, looking at taste as an example. The human being, when you look at a dog can eat the same food day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. Or animals do that anyway. All of the animal kingdom do that anyway. The human being is the only one that cannot do that. Today is a Sunday in England, and I'm not sure what traditional foods are eaten on a Sunday in Europe, but in England there's a thing called the Sunday roast. Now, on a Sunday, it's enjoyed by everybody, and maybe some people would enjoy it on a Monday too. But come Tuesday, Wednesday, they're pretty much sick of it. They need to change their diet. We've been designed to eat so many different things. You take a piece of beef. In England, we roast it. In America, they hamburger it. In China, they stir fry it. In the Middle East, they curry it. You can mince it, and you can make say a goulash out of it, or a lasagna out of it. Yet it's fundamentally a simple piece of beef. A chicken is the blandest meat on the menu, but you put some herbs and spices with it together, it becomes the tastiest meat on the menu. No other creature seems to do that. And so when it talks about God's invisible qualities, those are the things that we should be looking at to see the power and wisdom and love that God has for mankind. But then when you notice the verse, it says, so that they are without excuse. Other translations would render it as inexcusable, because when you're looking through the microscope, or whether you're looking for the telescope, either one of those magnifying tools that mankind have developed, there is no excuse to turn around and say God does not exist. There's no excuse using the microscope to turn around and say that God does not exist. The fact that the more you use the microscope, the more complicated the cell is now being understood to be. And when you're looking at the telescope, the vastness of the universe, there's the symmetry of it, the way that the matter of the universe is formed, with galaxies and stars and gravity and light and time, there is no way that these things could have happened by accident. So when the scripture says,
but they did, everything's an accident. This is the materialist view, that everything's an accident. There is no guiding reason. So yet, how can you trust your senses if they say that you cannot get information from outside your senses? How can you trust your mind if your mind was built on an irrational process that was random? And there's no order, there's no structure. I mean, these things are, and of course, we believe, look, the idea of law in nature comes from Christians, right? Actually, hold on, let me do a couple of things. Let me bring first that up. There's a few things I want to quote here. So actually, no, I need to find the word lawgiver. So let me do that first. Here, this is from C.S. Lewis, right, who wrote the book Mere Christianity. Men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a legislator or a lawgiver. So the idea of the laws of nature, although atheists claim that, that is a Christian idea because Christianity was not paganism. Christianity believed that God was coherent, that he had set the world in motion, if a clockmaker, if you want to use that analogy, and there was logic and order and reason behind this. And therefore we were able to discern that reason and we had to apply our reason. So they had the faith that they could apply their reason and understand the world, and that's why the Western civilization became so powerful. And they expected law in nature because God is a lawgiver. Would you agree with that statement, Thunderous?
Absolutely, because when you look at word association and you use the word law, the byproduct of law is order, law and order.
Yes.
If people
yes.
are obedient,
Actually, very true. Yeah, you're British. You should know law and order. Yes. Yes.
So what we see in the universe and what we see within nature is order, because there are laws and parameters that have been put in there that cannot go beyond the mathematical equations of the realm that they exist in. For instance, that we use physical law, or we use the law of gravity, the law of light, the law of chemistry. All of them operate within certain parameters and
Yeah.
fine-tuned.
Yeah.
That's why you have order.
You're right. No, yeah. There's this one more quote that I want to add. Just a couple of things I want to get through, and then I'll hand over to you again. This is a quote from Pope John Paul II. Science can purify religion from error and superstition. Religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolutes. Each can draw the other into a wider world, a world in which both can flourish. I mean, that's a really powerful statement. They're speaking here of science and reason and faith operating together, right, supporting each other. And now there's something else I want to mention. We bring up a different quote. This is Khalil Gibran. So I believe he was a Mennonite Christian, or he's a Lebanese Maronite Christian, or something, from the Lebanon. He was Lebanese American. He wrote a beautiful book called The Prophet. And it's worth reading. I think it's just great poetry. But this is where he speaks of the confluence of reason versus logic. And so, well, let me read this. Your reason and your passion are the rudder and the sails of your seafaring soul. If either your sails or your rudder be broken, you can but toss and drift, or else be held at a standstill in mid-seas. For reason, ruling alone, is a force confining, and passion, unattended, is a flame that burns to its own destruction. Therefore let your soul exalt your reason to the height of passion, that it may sing. And let it direct your passion with reason, that your passion may live through its own daily resurrection, and like the phoenix, rise above its own ashes. I would have you consider your judgment and your appetite, even as you would two loved guests in your house. Surely you would not honor one guest above the other, for he who is more mindful of one loses the love and the faith of both. Your thoughts on that, Thunderous?
Well, it reminds me of the scripture in Jeremiah where it says that the heart is more desperate and treacherous. Who can know it? So it's kind of like your emotions and your reason have to be combined in the decisions that you make moving forward in life. If you go with one or go with the other, then you tend to make a decision that's not really going to be well-being for you. Particularly if you go with your heart. The world says go with your heart, go with what your heart is saying. But the reality is that the scriptures teach us our heart can deceive us. You know, we tend to like things that we shouldn't like.
Fair point. Yes.
You know, so our power of reason would be the thing that tempers where the heart might want to direct us into, what action our heart wants to direct us into doing. I'll give an example. It says in the scripture, vengeance is mine, I will pay. I think I will repay, says the Lord. I think that's in Romans 13 or somewhere around about there. That's because when we get wronged, our sense of indignation makes us want to act. Our heart wants us to act. But our power of reason must restrain us. Otherwise, as James says, be wrathful, but do not sin. It's okay to be angry. Being angry, even God gets angry. Jesus got angry. There's nothing wrong with anger if it's righteous indignation. But our power of reason must control us so that we do not sin. So that's what came to mind with what from reading this poem.
Yeah, and that the logos is also reason. I mean, the logos is reason. It's not feeling. There's a couple of things. So Sergeant Grinch says, When I explain to atheists and others that morality come from a creator, I get lame arguments and more humanist gobbledygook. Yeah, where do you have an absolute morality? Where do you have an objective morality from the periodic table? You don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to know, because I've posed this question to many Darwino atheists, is what is the chemical composition for free will? Or if you can say that rape is wrong, even though rape is quite prevalent in the natural world, can you give me the chemical composition? Because you've just said it's wrong. Can you give me the
Yeah,
chemical
it's not
composition?
matter extending into space. They're
Exactly.
utilizing thought. Thought is not matter extending into space, which is really so materialists, as I discussed, materialists are utilizing metaphysical concepts like logic, mathematics, the idea of science, right? Thoughts, and yet they are violating and going beyond the realm of materialism of matter itself when they make their claims about materialism. So yet they have to escape outside of materialism to claim that materialism is true, and they claim that they don't exist, and they want to then tell you that you don't exist, that you're an illusion. How does one self go and tell another self that they both don't exist?
Ask an evolutionist.
Yeah.
The thing is, you see, for me, if everything is just material, my counter argument is, if everything is just material, can you tell me why do you think it's wrong? Because you're a married man. Well, first of all, I normally say to an atheist, well, why did you get married? That's a religious ceremony. So you've gone and contradicted your own worldview by practicing a religious action, because it was God that ordained the marriage arrangement. There's no requirement in Darwinian evolution for you to go to an organization or a body and turn around and say, we are now man and wife. There's no requirement for that. So why did you do it? The only reason you've done it is because it's a social construct out of religion. So you've got to.
Sorry, you broke up there, Thunderous. Can you repeat that? Sorry, you broke up for a few seconds.
And she's a good looking woman. I can see your wife's over there. She's a good looking woman. I'm a good looking guy. She's giving me the eye. What's wrong with me going over there and formally inviting myself for her to come and spend the night with me? Why would you have a problem with that? If there's no such thing as free will and everything is just predicated on chemical reactions, I can see that your wife is looking at me and having a good chemical reaction, looking towards me, wanting to know if I'm having good chemical reactions towards her. So why do you have a reaction that's negative towards the two positives that your wife and I have with each other? And why is it wrong? Why do you consider the actions of your wife sleeping with another man wrong? What is the chemical equation for that? The reason why they can't,
really good question.
The reason why they can't come up with any moral answer from their own worldview is because when you look at the scripture, I think it's in Genesis 1:26, where it says, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. It's because all human beings are made in the image of God. So our sense of right and wrong, good and bad, come from within the psyche of the human being that we've inherited from God. God is the one that's given us. So the atheist can't understand why he thinks certain things are right and certain things are wrong, because he can't rationalize that down to the periodic table, because there's nothing beyond the material. So they have to come down to the periodic table, but they can't rationalize it unless they can come up with a chemical equation as to what is the chemical creation, how much, say, oxygen, nitrogen, and gold and sulfur do you put together, or other elements maybe, to say that there you go, that's what. That's the chemical equation. You drink some of that, then you'll know that rape is wrong. Or that part of the brain that releases these chemicals in that composition is what's telling you rape is wrong. They can't do that.
Sergeant Grint asks, if your wife is sleeping with another man, is that the Big Bang Theory?
Well, the interesting thing with the Big Bang is this, right? And there are many versions of it, only from the Darwino atheist point of view. You look at they mock, going back to what I was trying to say earlier, when they mock the creationists, yet we believe as Christians that and it's a real science, that if you have enough energy, you can create matter. So that gives us an explanation where the physical universe came off, that the outside of the physical universe, there is a being that has enough energy that can create matter. I think the book of Isaiah talks about due to the abundance of dynamic energy. Yet the atheist would tell you the universe came from nothing. Yeah, anything, how can you say that is the very definition of magic?
Yeah, that is true, but also that is superstition, but also, again, it's a denial and rejection of anything that would lead to God. I mean, something
Exactly.
I noted here was in psychology, materialism denies the existence of the very subject that psychologists claim to study, which is the mind and consciousness. Take someone like Daniel Dennett, who denies the existence of the mind. The mind is merely an illusion or delusion that, and Sam Harris holds the same view of matter. So somehow chemicals colliding, like chemicals sloshing together, right? Chemicals mixing or atoms colliding create your emotional and mental states and your thoughts. So those are purely the acts of, under physical laws, atoms colliding. There is no underlying metaphysical structure or overarching metaphysical structure that's guiding that. There is no soul. It's the denial of that. So what is having this, it's just, it seems incoherent. It seems completely
The thing
incoherent.
is, you see, the thing is, then they can't turn around and say, well, a person goes into a building in America and shoots a lot of people dead, like a mass killing. Why would they say that's wrong? Because if falling in love in
No,
South,
under Marx, no, sorry, under Darwin's law, technically that would actually improve the human race. Don't forget, World War One was I covered this when I discussed Darwin recently. My last two episodes on Darwin, I went through that in detail. Darwin said that when you kill off the weakest ones, you improve life, you
improve the human
improve
race. Yes.
the human race. So therefore, the Germans who adopted, and the Germans, Darwin states in his own words that the Germans are the ones who adopted his ideas and would become the future bearers and the future promoters of his ideas when the Germans did the first genocide 14 years after Darwin wrote his book. And then World War One, that was a purely Darwinian war. And if you read the history of it, and I know it's not covered in school or university, but the Germans are stating we are doing this for Darwinian reasons to make life better. We are murdering millions of people to improve human life on Earth.
Oh, absolutely, because that's where they wanted to get rid of the disabled, the feeble-minded. They didn't want them to breed and produce more offspring because they would breed faster than, say, the purebloods, as far their worldview is concerned, and therefore the lesser bloods, if for want of a better phrase, or the ones that don't fit the eugenics mantra or mandate, would outbreed those that are the chosen breed then, and
Yeah.
that's where, so they wanted to remove them out of society so that the world was only filled with the people that are also what's the phrase, okay, I'm trying to think of the phrase, the master race. That's what I suppose is
Yes,
one
yes.
of the
Well,
phrases
Hitler,
I use.
few people realize Hitler states in his own words. I mean, they try to bill him as a Christian, right, as much as they can. But the Catholics, for instance, voted heavily against him. The Protestants voted for him. If the Protestants had not voted for Hitler, he'd have been nobody because he would never have achieved power, right? Where can we? So Basil, get that. If you have a look in my Darwin series, the last two episodes of Darwin, just what is the quote you're looking for, and I'll try and find it for you. But um, Hitler states that he's a materialist. Okay, he admired Nietzsche, and Hitler states he's a materialist, right? So now you've got him pegged to atheism and this materialist Greek philosophy, right? This pagan philosophy. And two, he also very bluntly, very voluminously writes about Darwinism. He's a staunch Darwinist. He got it from the first generation of Germans prior to him who were involved in the First World War, right? And their sons and grandchildren are now involved in the Second World War, right? They're leading. And this is a Darwinist war, once again. Atheism and Darwinism strikes back. Hitler promoting the genocide based on Darwin. So have a look at my last two episodes, Basilget, of I've renamed the series to Darwin, Moral Monster. The last two episodes, I cover that in detail. I go through Hitler's views on Darwinism. Hitler was promoting a Darwinist agenda, and he speaks about it. Mein Kampf is riddled with references to and interpretations of Darwin. Applications. This was an out and out application of Darwin. Basically, Darwin stated there's no objective morality, there is no God, and he denied that there was any kind of, well, he became a saint of death. He believed that death brings life, death brings improvement.
It's interesting to note, isn't it? It's just come to my mind that all these
Mm-hmm.
people who turn around and say that there is no free will, there is no moral compass, there is no moral law, and everything is subjective. But subjectively, they all seem to have the same sort of
But
like.
then, how can they be right and we be wrong if everything is subjective?
Well, how can it be that all these people who say that there is no God and there's no moral law as such all seem to turn around and say that theft is wrong? How can they all say that sleeping with another man's wife is wrong or that murder is wrong? Sam Harris and these people wouldn't say that it's right. Yet they all seem to collectively come to the same subjective conclusion. Does that not make sense in itself that all these human beings that deny there's an intelligent designer have
Well,
subjective thinkings and conclusions, but their subjective conclusions about what is and what isn't moral are all exactly the same?
yeah. So hold on. So Cascarabia says, "What I say that I want to see the next fight of David Benavidez." Okay, so Cascarabias, that is completely irrelevant and off topic. Let's talk about the topic we're discussing here. Um, on this point, something few realize about Plato, right? Plato is one of the philosophers that also underpins a lot of these ideas through history, and he writes the Politeia, right? And it says here that Plato legitimized state socialism. Few people realize. Now, we always get told Plato is one of the great thinkers of history, and all other philosophers are just a footnote to Plato. Of course, they don't tell you Plato was also very much into totalitarianism and social control. Plato actually had a very dark side. And when you go through these people, so somehow they forget to mention that the people who promote Plato in the academia obviously want to promote these very same ideas like totalitarianism and social control based on their ideas. But he also says that philosophers were called the righteous and the saints. And if you look today, that these scientists are the saints. Philosophers became scientists. Natural philosophers, what we called them back then, are what we call scientists today. They were the great thinkers. And of course, now they've simply taken on this whole idea that, and within the context of Plato, they are the righteous ones. They are the saints. So therefore, these scientists are the righteous ones. And Plato designed an ideal state whose main purpose is the perfection of man, like the Übermensch under the Nazis. Then, of course, you've got the perfect socialist man and woman under good old Marx and Lenin and Stalin et al. And Plato held the opinion that the state can fulfill its pastoral task within the framework of a state socialist form of organization, because you've got all of these, these uncontrolled random atoms sloshing around. Well, you need to control them with a state that will shepherd them into the right direction, because you can't have randomness going on.
Yeah, and therefore, by definition, if they're serving as saints, then they're serving as gatekeepers to what they consider knowledge is. Then.
Yep, and yeah, there was a few other things that I was going to mention. Someone spoke about free will. Okay, so hold on. Let me close. Let me see where this is going to go. Oh, another thing. So the term cosmos, I hadn't got this far yet, but we live in an optimistic universe, right? We believe that there is a great, loving, kind God who has a plan, who wants you to do well, who, if life has been unjust to you, there will be justice. If life has been unfair to you, ultimately there will be fairness. Ultimately there will be recompense. Ultimately there will be reward for your faithfulness. Whereas in atheism, you have a chaotic universe, and I'll cover this probably on Tuesday. I'll probably do the second episode of this, right? So the Greek concept of cosmos refers to an ordered, harmonious, and purposeful universe with beauty, structure, and rationality in the universe. Very much a Christian view as well. It suggested that there were objective principles of order and harmony that governed the universe. Now, this is in contrast to the materialist, atheist view of chaos, which implied randomness, disorder, and meaninglessness, which is, would you agree that, Thunderous, this is the Darwinian view, and this is also the Sam Harris view, this is also the Richard Dawkins view, this is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse view. This is exactly
that.
So what you've got is you've got an orderly cosmos, day and night, the planets going in their orbits, right? So what you've got is, now philosophy, science, mathematics, and art are attempts to understand and to embody, to describe the cosmic order. This is why religion created these what we call domains of knowledge: philosophy, science, mathematics, because they believed life wasn't irrational, the universe was not irrational, and therefore they created these, including poetry, art, architecture, to celebrate, to explore, to define and understand the beauty and the order of the universe. Whereas what you have is, you've got, right, you've got these atheists, materialists claiming there is no order, everything's irrational, nothing is planned. Yet, by the same token, they contradict themselves by having, for instance, materialist, so historical materialism, like with Marx, that there is a purpose, a higher purpose that you've got to have, like Hegelian dialectic and all of these. So they contradict themselves all the time. But you've got a purposeless, nihilistic view of the universe versus one that says there's beauty. And look, as Christians, you need to understand your faith and people with a theological view of the world. They created these domains of knowledge, not these idiot atheists who just created chaos. I'll talk about that more on Tuesday. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
No, absolutely. The thing that I was just thinking of then is that I'm reading the book The Long War Against God again, and what came to my mind as you was reading that paragraph off. Can I just read a paragraph from this book, if I may? Right, so I'm reading from The Long War Against God. It's written by Dr. Henry Morris, and I'm taking this from page 161 under the subheading The Mysterious Role of Charles Lyell. I'm just going to read the last paragraph.
Sure.
Okay, it is worth noting that almost none of the leaders of this evolutionary revival had been trained as scientists in the modern sense. None were educated as physicists or chemists or biologists or geologists or astronomers or other natural scientists. As already noted, Charles Darwin himself was an apostate divinity student whose only degree was in theology. Charles Lyell was a lawyer, William Smith a surveyor, James Hutton an agriculturalist, John Playfair a mathematician, Charles Chambers, so I just got to turn the page, Charles Chambers a journalist, Alfred Russel Wallace had little formal education of any kind, only with a brief apprenticeship in surveying. Thomas Huxley had an indifferent education in medicine. Herbert Spencer received practically no formal education except one practical experience in the railway engineering.
Railway engineering. That's like the guy from the UN who was on the panel for climate change.
Thomas Malthus was a theologian and economist, whilst Erasmus Darwin was a medical doctor and poet. Of all of the chief contributors to the revival of evolutionism commonly associated with Charles Darwin in France and Ernest Haeckel in Germany seem to have a bona fide education in the branch of evolutionary science that they pursued, and they had their own particular anti-Christian agendas to promote. The point that I'm trying to make is that when you consider that what you're saying there, for instance, that the whole scientific community, it portrays itself as people of knowledge, particularly in the Darwinian side of trying to explain how life came about, that it is science, it is scientific to believe these things, when the reality is the whole scientific premise of Darwinian evolution and atheism had been built up by men with no scientific qualification at all.
You have a good point. I just want to mention something here. Again, I'm going to refer to the Catholic Church because if we refer to the First Baptist Church on the corner of 1st and 3rd in Philadelphia, there's like 19 members in total, so it's not like they're a representative sample, so we'll go with this. But this is a Wikipedia page because there's one other topic I want to ask your opinion on as well. This is a list of lay Catholic scientists, and these are people who have actually contributed to the development of science throughout history, right? These include, now, Catholics. Galileo Galilei, René Descartes, okay, we'll talk about him another time. Louis Pasteur, Blaise Pascal, André-Marie Ampère, right? You would know the word amperes, you know what that is. Charles Augustin de Coulomb, Pierre de Fermat, Antoine Laurent Lavoisier, okay, Volta, Augustin Louis Cauchy, Pierre Duhem, blah, 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 a whole bunch. Christian Doppler, okay? Then you have to have a whole list from A to Z. Now, I thought that Christians don't have reason. So let's have a look of this list of scientists that have contributed. Like Matteo Realdo Colombo, just to pick a random guy, discovered the pulmonary circuit, which paved the way for Harvey's discovery of circulation. He's a Christian, he's a Catholic, and of course Catholics are pagans, of course, that's what everyone says. And Christians are unreasonable, is what atheists say. And yet these people somehow are using their reason and logic and education to contribute to science. And there's going to be more names here than atheists, for sure. So atheists just love talking absolute poop all the time. Oh, your thoughts on that, Thunderous, before I go to the next
absolutely.
point?
I've heard this argument so many times to the point I've bored to sobs. that atheists and Darwin evolutionists turn around and say, no, there's no such thing as a scientist that believes in God, when the greatest list of scientific achievements that we live with today are from the minds of people who believe in intelligent design. And whilst we're on this subject, I'd like to bring people's attention to a guy I've been following for about 3 years now, maybe 4, and his name is Dr. James Tour.
Yes, yes, I watch him all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, as well as I do, is there, in the modern field of chemistry, how many men would you say are as knowledgeable as science in that field?
Very few. He's in a league with maybe 3 other people in the world.
Yes, and yet he is destroying all 10 of the major league abiogenesis scientists that are in the world. So that is, for those who don't know, Dr. James Tour is a chemical engineer, and he is leading the argument against, or rather he's asking the question, can you explain how these cells, or how these proteins and the DNA and RNA all came together to form the first cell?
Yeah, he is destroying these atheistic, materialistic arguments. I mean, he's saying that he's talking about design, and it's very strong argument.
It's a very strong argument. It reduces the argument that chemicals came together in an organic soup, undirected chance, can ever have come together to form the first cell. It is absolute perverted thinking to ever consider that. Now, he's very strong and very passionate in the way that he speaks, and he probably couldn't. No, we may not have the science. Oh, we clearly don't have the scientific understanding that he does. But to listen to a scientist challenge the scientific community by calling them out, and he actually calls them out as liars for lying, to say that the first cell could have formed by now.
Yeah, he's an organic chemist. So Horse is asking that. Pedro says no, Lloyd. They're all closet atheists. You're back, Thunderous. Yeah, your connection drops in and out sometimes.
Oh, I don't know what's causing that, so I apologize.
It happens. Guys, just to remind you, this last month, I had 116% more views on my channel. So my channel views more than doubled. However, my subscriber count barely ticked up more than usual. Actually, it didn't at all. So yeah, for those of you who do watch the channel, who do consume the content, I'd appreciate your subscription. That would really help the channel get the content that I make out to more people. And yeah, something I want to ask you, Thunderous, another topic I want to introduce. So Greek philosophers in the 6th century BC analyzed the laws governing the cosmos and developed a mechanical, deterministic worldview, right? So they wanted to claim, now remember, this is in violation of the prevailing, shall we say, theological worldview, because few people, right, Marx's idea is promoted as an economic system, right, a system of economics. However, it is not a system of economics. It is a system of theology. Marx was a theologian, not an economist, right? Marxism is a theology, not a system of economy. Now, also, it's a system of moralizing, right? So he's got his own system of theological, well, that's his theological system. But the same token, atheism is a theology. You can call it an atheology. These people were standing against the view that there's order in the cosmos caused by a mind greater than the cosmos that laid it down, that set the rules and set it running. Now, they perceived cosmic laws as mandating all action, but physical laws. They don't believe there's any such thing as mind or anything beyond the basic laws of physics, right? And they called it ananke, Latin necessity, and this is the driving principle for everything in the physical world. So Leucippus and Democritus, and I'll be talking about Democritus and Darwin in a while.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah, sure.
The Latin for ananke, the Latin for necessity, but necessity in itself requires something that needs the necessity. Otherwise, the necessity in itself wouldn't exist. Necessity, from my understanding, would require somewhere that you need to arrive to.
Now, isn't that a contradiction of the idea that life is purposeless, and yet somehow they've now injected purpose, a telos, a purpose, an end game for the universe, which they claim is progress, upliftment, from different stages, moving from one level, the primitive, up, 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 and then eventually you go through from primitive superstition, you move to religion, and you get rid of religion because that's also just really primitive superstition, and then you become atheistic scientific. And hold on, I thought we have a purposeless universe that's random and erratic, and now they're introducing purpose, necessity.
Yes.
And the only thing that can have necessity, that can have purpose and intentionality, is a mind. How does matter, how does a brick have intentionality?
And how does it know where it's going? If it's an inanimate object and it doesn't have any sense of direction, it's not self-conscious, it's not alive, it doesn't have free will, how does it know where does a brick know that it's a brick? Does a brick know that it's inside a wall with cement above and beneath it?
That brick could
does
be your aunt. You could be dissing your cousin, dude.
Does a slice of bread know it's a slice in a loaf?
So please.
Does it know it's going to go to the toaster? Does it know it's going to have butter and jam smeared on there? So how does it know where it's going for it to have anything to necessitate its necessity?
So yeah, exactly. I mean, these are questions that they don't have answers to, as much as they would like to lie and tell you otherwise.
Well, that's where gatekeeping comes in, because they hide behind this. It's what's known as authoritative gatekeeping. So they hide behind their titles, they hide behind their academic achievements, in order to project a thought on those that maybe, this is why you'll hear it from Muslims as an example. They will, when they find that the argument is becoming weak on their part, they'll say, well, are you a scholar? What qualifications do you have?
Don't Muslims ask the same question?
It's the same thing with science. When you're talking amongst the science, well, what qualification do you have? What academic achievement have you received? It's as though that, well, does that mean that the question being posed has become suddenly valueless because I haven't received an academic achievement? For me, the question either stands or it doesn't stand. If it does stand, then answer the question. If the question doesn't stand, then give me an answer that proves my question false.
So interesting. Sophia Marcellus says, without intelligence, there's no order, only entropy, which is very true. We can observe that in the world. Design, order, are intentionality, purpose, are functions of intelligence, of mind. So mind is clearly something that stands outside of the physical realm. In fact, we are people that have experiences. In a sense, we have our own subjective experiences. We are people that, and we are not merely physical. Clearly, we're not merely just physical, right? There's something beyond merely the physical. We're not just matter extending into space. And these atheists have it completely wrong. Let me add one more point, Thunderous, because we're approaching the hour mark, and I don't want to go too much over that. But I want to get your thoughts on this. Leucippus and Democritus attributed ananke, or necessity, as the driving force behind the movements of atoms in their descent, thereby introducing determinism into atomism. So in other words, everything was made of these little particles called atoms, right? And these atoms would clump together on the basis of things like their shapes, right? And this created, these are random things, therefore you can have no universals. I've discussed in the past with the audience. A universal is like, when you see a dog, you know it's a dog. You know it's not a chicken. You know it's not a rat. You know it's not a cat. You can tell, even if it's a Chihuahua or a Great Dane or a Saint Bernard, you can tell it's a dog. There's a dogness about it. There's something dog-like about it. That is the universal, this quality of dogness. Now, the particular type of dog it is, that's something particular to the dog, right? That's that particular thing. But you can see the dogness. So now those are universals, and these atheists and these materialists deny universals. Now they're saying that the movement of atoms, so that's why when these atoms clump together in a shape, it's just an accident, kind of, right? And therefore there's no universals. It's just an accident that these things all made the same shape. But here you've got determinism. Now you've got this atomic determinism, this based on physics, just matter sloshing into matter. Then you've got someone like Calvin who states, hold on, we have no free will. And please, if you're a Calvinist, read Calvin. Please do me a favor, go actually read John Calvin. I don't care what John MacArthur says about Calvin, because, good God, John MacArthur is an idiot. But please just read John Calvin. John Calvin says you have no free will. All right, let's be blunt. So does Martin Luther. Martin Luther says exactly the same. You have zero free will. Now, Now you've got these atheists, these materialists, who are anti-Christian in the extreme, the opposite of God, against God, saying that there's no free will. And you've got these theologians saying the very same thing. How can you square that circle? And also they say here that the atom's fall is dependent on chance, which is something that these atheists also say. Chance happens. Darwin said it, others atheists said it. Chance happens, and that's why you have some variations. But your thoughts on that, please.
Well, the chance. It seems strange that the chance doesn't go beyond the parameters. There are laws keeping those parameters within there. So, for instance, you mentioned the word, dog. A dog is a dog is a dog is a dog. Whether it's this dog, that dog, or that dog, it's not a cat. It's not a chicken. But so how does chance have parameters that don't go beyond outside the realm of the species that it is then, or the type that it is, when Scripture actually teaches us according to their kind? So how do they equate for that then, if everything is just by chance?
Right. Pedro Jr. says very, very interestingly, Frank Turek always says, how does an acorn know how to turn into a pine tree instead of an apple tree? That's the telos of nature. Sorry, yeah?
Well, I was going to say, but that's following a law. That's following a program that it won't become an apple, or
but that's purpose. But think that is actual purpose. Does a brick have a purpose?
A brick does have a purpose, but the purpose for the brick is being placed there by the one who made the brick in the first place, and for the use that he's going to have it for. He makes a brick for a purpose. The brick has a specific design.
But does the brick itself have a mind? Because purpose means, the fact that the tree has a purpose, an intention, right, an intentionality, means it's being driven somewhere by a mind that created it, or it has a mind or some kind of purpose. There's some kind of life to it.
For that purpose. Yeah.
Yes.
For that purpose. And the purpose for, say, the apple tree is to provide fruit and nutrition for something that is created, that knows that created being requires nutrition and sustenance.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
And it's a cycle that repeats itself. Hence why the seed dies, goes back in the ground, and with a program produces another kind according to its kind that repeats the pattern of producing fruit all over again.
Would you agree that only a mind can produce a program? Only a mind can make predictions? Only a mind can produce a plan?
Absolutely. Chaos can't do that. The thing is, when they're talking about things falling out and parts coming together, forming a sum or a whole, you see that's like asking to put a hand grenade in say a sand, and expecting the same explosion or the same pattern of the explosion every time you repeat the experiment. It's not going to do that. It's going to be chaotic, because the angle of the mass of the sand that's there, or the angle of the hand grenade, essentially, you're not going to get. An explosion is a kind of chaotic thing to happen, but you're not going to get exactly the same results every time that you use a hand grenade. It's going to be different every time. So what I don't understand is, and if it atomizes, just atoms coming together, how can they expect the same thing to be produced every time then, if it's just chaos?
I want to go back to you because I was a little distracted, but I want to ask you again in terms of what is the difference between the theological view of having a lack of free will, of pure theological determinism, versus this literally pagan and now supposedly scientific atheist determinism. These are all three the same thing. They have the same end point at the end of the day. You have no free will. Everything's determined. But what is the difference between this? What's your thoughts on that? Again, without putting you on the spot, I'm just curious to see how you would describe this and see, because that's not the Christian view.
I don't see any difference there. I think they're anti-Christian.
Nicodemus wants to test the hand grenade in sand theory. Yeah, I want to see if I can throw a hand grenade in a junkyard and build a car. Yeah. So you don't see any difference there at all?
No.
So how is that Christian then? I really have to wonder, how is this Christian?
There is nothing Christian
pagan
about that.
Aren't Christians supposed to be different to pagans?
Well, what I don't understand is, where it turns around and says there's no space for independent human agency or moral judgment. So why did God put in settle Adam in the Garden of Eden and say, do not eat from that tree of knowledge of good and bad? That was a moral argument or a moral case of law there. And
they made a choice to violate that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Actually, really. Seriously, you make me think as well. You also make me think.
And you also said, if you eat from the tree, you will die. So there's the judgment.
There's a choice. Yeah, there's a consequence. There's punishment. reward and punishment for moral
And it was
choices.
individual action. So your individual action from eating that tree, which was the law, will result in that judgment.
Very interesting. Fair point. So hopefully the audience is picking up on that. Should we take one or two audience questions? So for the audience, we'll be happy to take one or two questions and then call it an evening, because I don't want to go more than an hour on these. Also, I'm not available Wednesday, Thunder. So maybe when are you available next, so we can schedule the next one?
Sunday.
Next Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay, that would work. Yeah. So yeah, men can get pregnant. Yeah, that's where we've ended up now. That's where we've ended up. That's just the bastardization of language. I mean, you can put incoherent ideas together in a grammatically correct fashion. That is possible. It doesn't make them true. The fact that you can express something well doesn't mean that the thing is actually true or accurate. So, any audience questions we'll take? Yeah, sorry, Thunderous?
But with what Tom, what's his name, Gokai
Tom
is
Gokai,
saying,
yeah.
I would turn around and say that whatever you're seeing in the world today is a deliberate attack on the Bible. For instance, take the argument for abortion, where the world is now saying that it's okay to have abortion, that you're a couple cells. Well, the Bible says in the book of Psalms, you saw the very embryo of me, and in your book all its parts were written down. The Bible makes clear who created in the beginning made them male and female, whereas now you're being told you can decide what sex you are, you can decide if you're a male or female. Don't let your genitalia determine what you are now. So those are just two examples of many examples where, for instance, drag, that the world would tell you under diversity, being inclusive, it's okay for a man to walk around wearing women's clothing, but we know that's something that yet again the Bible quite clearly condemns. So there are a lot of things that we're seeing in the world today. They're not attack on Islam. They're attack on the theological moral laws that are brought about via the biblical narrative. So everything that you see in the world today, my attitude is, I wonder what they're challenging in the Bible to make the think that is okay now.
Yeah, Nicodemus asks us, what is your take on the origin of ATP? What makes cells operate? So, Nicodemus, I don't think we were having a discussion on chemistry. I'm not aware that that was the topic of the discussion. I mean, I could just as well ask you, what is the orbital velocity of the moon? Right? This is something you take up with James Tour on his channel. He discusses this in quite depth, so there are people who do that. I'm not certain that I was making... Yes, you came in very late. Hold on, there's something I want to maybe end off with in terms of free will. So this is part of my upcoming talk on this in the next few days, right? So let me just do a few points from this. I won't do every point. So free will allows for independent moral choices and responsibility. God is omnipotent, but he voluntarily limits his power to allow for human free will. He doesn't override our free will. Otherwise, we would be moral puppets. We would have no control, right? So necessity and determinism are subject to God's will, not independent forces that limit his power. We have the freedom to accept or reject God, to do good or to do ill. So our destiny relies on the free choice to accept or reject, right? The offer of salvation through Christ. So now the future is open and undetermined until we make our choice. Now, God does not operate based on arbitrary chance or on randomness. Right? This is a pagan idea, and these atheists are pushing a pagan idea. So there are mysteries in God's will. We don't understand his will, right? He allows evil to happen. He allows things to happen, but he has an ultimate purpose and a plan. But now what's important is here. Free will. In Christianity, humans have moral responsibility because they have free will to make real choices, not because their actions are determined by necessity, chance, or arbitrary destiny. Free will is required for love, morality, and meaning. Determinism destroys these, and you have no choice. There was no actual value to what you did. You were simply a puppet in a script, in a play, like a cartoon character. If strict determinism is true, there is no basis for justice, there is no basis for fairness, there is no reward, and there is no punishment. Justice requires moral responsibility. If our choices are determined, we have no moral responsibility. We are just programmed. So we have no free choice. You cannot hold someone morally responsible for actions beyond their control. So justice is destroyed. Fairness requires free choice and moral responsibility. You cannot reward someone for actions they did, just as you cannot punish someone for the actions they did. if everything was dictated by just physical laws beyond their control. So people must make free choices that lead to consequences, and determinism destroys this as well. So determinism allows for no free giving or receiving of love. It destroys the conditions that make love possible. Determinism eliminates the foundations of justice, fairness, purpose, meaning, and love. Also, the concepts of justice, ethics, and love evaporate without free will. So your thoughts on that? I'll let you end off, Thunderous. And there's one more question, yeah?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of the points there, and that is a subject in itself that we can discuss, where I can bring out a myriad of scriptures for probably each point raised there with reference to free will, and examples in the biblical narrative where God has stood back and allowed free will to take place, even though it's gone badly for the person or good for the person, where he has not got involved at all in the choices that human beings made. I mean, even when God has chosen certain people and he's allowed them to carry out their free will, and it's gone against him. And I'll give an example: King Saul. King Saul was the first king that Yahweh chose for the nation of Israel. Then later on, God says he regretted he made Saul king. Now, that's an example of God, with the points that you brought out there, of God allowing free will to take place. And it wasn't determined. The fact that he allowed Saul to be king, then Saul made choices that even God himself regretted making him king. He didn't regret making Saul king as such. He regretted the decisions that Saul had made. Very much like a parent. A parent doesn't regret having children, but a parent can regret making the decisions that they've made that affect them adversely.
Yeah. So let's send off. Thank you very much for that, Thunderous, and take care, Crystal 711. God bless. Thanks for being here. Okay, so Catherine M says, first time I was told of predestination, I felt a sense of deep hopelessness. A lot of people do, and many of them turn atheist. So thanks, John Calvin. XYZ says, atheists always invoke justice and morality. I know, and those are Christian concepts, but yet materialism destroys those concepts, because by definition you have to have predeterminism, which means that you have no justice. Justice means there's a choice being made. And so this is contradictory. It is incoherent. It is crappy philosophy. And Pedro Jr. says, sorry, Thunders?
I was going to say, on the only XYZ, atheists always invoke just immorality. Just think of it this way: they can't help but do it because they're going against the psyche of the human nature, which God has put in there. Genesis 1:26, let's make man in our image. And I think it's Romans chapter 2, where it talks about wherever men that do not have law, they do the will, because it's written on their hearts. I forget how the scripture goes, but it's in Romans chapter 2, where it talks about human beings carrying out law.
This one, 14 and 15.
Oh, there you go then. That's the scripture. Yeah. The
requirements are written on their hearts. Yep. There it is.
Their conscience bears witness. There, that's the one. Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent.
Someone mentioned that earlier, which was quite nice. So I put it up. One of the people watching put it up. And let me just finish this last one. Pedro says, do you think Calvin and Luther denied free will to escape accountability from their own sins, like I didn't do it, God did? Yes, actually, I do. Luther had serious mental issues, the guy who had problems. Calvin, I believe, yes. Yep.
I also think it seems to be a natural inclination of some human beings as well to turn around and blame God, because when Adam sinned, and God took him to account, the first thing that Adam said was, well, it was the woman that you gave me that did it. So, blaming God for human beings' actions, human beings blaming God for their own actions is it's not the first time that's ever happened. Adam did it, and he's
that would be original. Yeah. So someone asks, how is predestination properly understood? It's a Catholic concept too. Yes, it is. But for instance, when you say freedom in the communist state, do they mean it the same way as freedom in a Western democracy? No, same words, same vocabulary, different dictionary. Just because you asked me, I have a number of videos on that topic. So if you go, I have a number of these on free will. I've discussed recently. Let me see if I can find this. Here, predestination here. So the form of predestination that Luther and Calvin had was known already in the 5th and 6th century as what's called the predestinarian heresy. So Luther and Calvin revived not only this form of paganism, But this form of paganism tried to enter into Christianity as a heresy called predestinarianism. So I have various discussions here on, you can see Calvin's own writings confirm double predestination. This one, what is the role of Satan in Calvinism? So I've got several videos on this. Okay, so just so you know, I've got this here. So I have this discussion here. So this is Luther, Calvin, and the predestinarian heresy. So they were actually literally promoting a heresy, a known heresy that was condemned by the Catholic Church in the 580s, I think it was. But it was known before that, but it was formally condemned in the 500s. It was condemned again, I think, in the 1100s. It was condemned again in the 1700s, 1600s. So Luther and Calvin were literally promoting heresies that were known to be heresies. They brought them back. And not only that, they brought Gnosticism in as well. So there's this very heavily Gnostic-flavored Christianity that they brought in. So yeah, those are things I'm going to be discussing in more depth again. So yeah, Thunderous, last word to you, and then we'll call it a night.
No, I'd just like to say thank you and an enjoyable show. Hope other people listening enjoyed the show, and thank you for having me on again, Lloyd.
No, thank you for your contribution. Quanda says, tried uploading your content to TikTok but got a strike. Is your stuff banned on that platform? I have no idea. I mean, I don't prevent people from spreading my stuff or using it or whatever it is. That is very odd. Catherine M says, this teaching has been life-changing. Thank you very much. You're most welcome. Thank you. Glad you understood it. Glad you enjoyed it as well. No, Thunderous, thank you. Always a pleasure. So yeah, we'll meet again in a week. And thank you very much for the time that you spent on this. And thank you to the audience. Guys, so if you do like this, please also subscribe to Thunderous. And also do like, share, subscribe. Thanks very much, guys. We'll need to call it a night. And we shall see you soon, probably on Tuesday. Take care, guys. It was the
Bye-bye.
Islam KKK video. No wonder. Okay, so don't spread that one. KKK is a bad word for the left.